good morning, everyone. This is Anne, live with Reaper Pro-Tips. We are here with me, your host, and Disembodied Hands, Justin/John. Both of the above. Probably, most likely. Hello, everybody. How are you this morning? We're vampiring today on this beautiful sunny morning. I don't buy the mirror thing, Shadow Raven. I never bought that vampire myth. Hello, planers. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Looks like everybody's just kind of settling in. So let's just settle in. So this is our Monique, who is, of course, a little chibi. She is adorbs. She needs, however, more work done on her black. So I think we're going to do black today. I'm doing good today. It's a good day. I've been trying to wake up every morning, planner, and tell myself it's a good day. It lifts my mood. Let's see here. So I think we're using... It looks pretty blue. We probably were using like... I don't know. I don't think it's Nightmare Blue, though. I think I probably was using blue liner with her. I have a thing... where I like to start with a dark, saturated, like, black blue and add white to it and get really realistic, black hair highlights that way. However, you can do it other ways, too. You could just take, a blue that you like cyan or ultramarine or tropical or anything like that, and just add some black to it to get a nice blue-gray that you can use for your, like, really black, hair or cloth. Cloth, less so. Unless you really want it to be like that blue-black. Really, like, kind of... It's better for black leather because and for black hair. And the reason is that the blue that you're seeing is really just sky reflection. That's why it looks right. Is that black hair will pick up that blue more than, like, brown hair or any kind of other hair color, if you think about it, is complementary color to the sky. Because brown is, like, an orange. So... You don't get the blue highlights with other hair, you just see white. But with black, you can often see that reflected blue light just because it's black. So that's why you get a different color. It's good that you haven't combusted spontaneously. But yes, so that's why you do bluish highlights on black hair, but that's also why it's not proper to do them on black cloth unless that cloth is shiny, because otherwise you're just going to get a general, like, usually a gray or a warm highlight on the cloth. So that's just a thought. I imagine her out in evening light when the sun has gone down. But, you know, she's Monique. Maybe she's got, like, a buy. Maybe she just wears really good sunblock, you know. I always wondered about that. You know, really, vampires, can't they make up, like, some sort of magical sunblock that could, like, counteract that? So for black cloth, I typically don't go blue. I typically will go with a different color. Maybe we'll use some Drown Nipple Pink. We used it on her skin, so we already have it as a precedent. It's an unusual color to use, although usually with black cloth, I want to go for a brown highlight. And this does have a lot of brown in it, so let's try it and see how it works. Yes, SPF 3000, exactly. So we're going to try this. And I want to mix up my black also. I want to have my base black around. When you're working on an area, try to always have your shadow, your midtone, and your highlight mixed up, or at least on your wet palette if you're using one. Obviously, if you're a well palette user like me, then have them mixed up and ready to hand. That way, if you blorf, or if you need to adjust, or if you need to mix two together, you have all those and you don't have to, like, break your groove and stop to mix things up. And for me, apparently, I got a nasty burn on my shoulders the other day. But I've always been somebody who could burn in the shade, so. All right, let's see here. Now we need some pure white. You could also go up with kind of an off-white. Actually, let's do that. Let's use bleached linen for our cloth highlight. And then we can go back and mix up some blue liner and white for the rest of her hair, because I haven't finished the back of her hair. I did an episode where we talked about kind of getting the halo effect on the top of the head, which is how it acts, how light acts on top of shiny hair when you've got an overhead light source. But we still have to do all of the back. But we'll do the cloth first. Morning, Val. Alrighty, so we've got our colors, our draw nipple, and any grayed out color for highlighting black cloth is good. Like I said, I usually don't use a blue unless the cloth is shiny, just because of what it implies, like visually to us. Don't use a pure gray, like people do, but don't. Always mix something into it, and in this case, I'm just using a grayed out purple. So generally, you don't want to use a flat gray. It's just really boring and it doesn't look great, and you really risk like making your cloth look gray more so than if you used an off color with gray mixed into it. I'm also going to thin these down a fair amount. We're going to start out at 2:1 paint to water. I had a little bit of a frog in my throat today because there's probably stuff in the air outside. It was kind of breezy yesterday, so I was kicking stuff up in the air. But today looks like it will be a very nice day. We had fajitas last night for Cinco de Steco, or Steco de Mayo, depending on how you want to put it. Yeah, as long as the vampires don't glitter. Yeah. I'm not for that glittery vampire thing. You notice I did not do a glitter. David stole my skin tone to do his vampires that he picked up for Warcry or Warhammer Underworlds. He likes to pick up the little war bands because some of them are nice sculpts and it's only like 4 models. But he liked the vampires a lot, so he picked those up and he stole my vampire skin tone to paint them with. 'Cause it's awesome. And it works so well with red armor. Like, if you're going to do vampires in red armor, like, do the greenish skin tone. It just works. It works so well. All right, so we're doing... okay. Planer, you just pumped my Patreon, so I'm going to take this opportunity to mention it. Hey, guys, I've got a Patreon, and I really like it. It's super fun, and there's tons of content because I've been doing it for over 2 years. And I just put up a special offer with a PDF on non-metallic metal, specifically Sky Earth non-metallic metal, but it also has useful tips just in starting to think about NMM, with lots of pictures of a really cool bust that I'm working on. And I probably will be working on that bust this afternoon in my own stream. I don't know. I could be in a D&D mood. I'm still kind of waiting and seeing. I get my caffeine this afternoon and then see. But anyway, yes, so my Patreon is patreon.com/paintingbig. And I have a lot of fun with it. And thank you everybody who's subscribed recently. It really does make a difference in my life, like hugely. So I appreciate you all. Oh, I have foggy glasses. I'm gonna clean those real quick. This is, you can tell I'm not a normal glasses wearer because, you know, I never have anything useful around to clean my glasses on, and I always forget to check before the stream. Alrighty. Let's go. Let's go. So let's get in focus at a higher level. There we are. Get my hand out of the picture so my color goes back to normal. There we are. Alrighty. But yes. So that's my Patreon. Thank you, Planer. Thank you for the Planer plug. Planer plug. Alright. I do want to touch up some stuff over here when we start doing the leather and the gold. There are some touch-ups I need to make. But so you don't want to use, you don't want to cover very much territory here. When you are highlighting black, most of your surface stays black. Just like you can see on the hair, most of the top surface of the head stays black. That's intentional. You want to keep about 75% of the surface black. So if you look at what you've got up here, you can see I've got a chunk of black here, a chunk of black here, And those two places are probably equivalent to the amount of highlighting. Like the surface area that this black and this black take up are probably the same as the surface area that this blue and this blue take up if you combine them together. But then we've also got a double dose, a double wide area of black over here. And so what that's going to do is at least 75% of the area is going to be black. It's going to still look black even with the highlights on it. That is the key. That is what you want. So when you go down to do these, you may start out thinking, oh, I have to highlight. I have to, get a lot of highlights here. So let's just block in a highlight. What most people would do, is something like that maybe. But then what you've got is 50% of your surface is actually, even more if you weather the bottom edge, 50% of your surface then is drownable pink. It's not black. So it's probably going to look like a dark drownable pink. Right now, that's what it looks like. So what you want to do instead is you want to sneak some black into there. Maybe put some black right up here underneath this armor plate because you'd have a shadow under that. Let me get a little closer here. Try to stay in the camera here. Maybe you want to fade in this area a little bit. Make these side highlights a little bit softer or thinner. You want to reintroduce your black. See, now that's starting to just look black with highlights. We still, though, I think, can take the black down a bit here so I can cover this entire upper area. And everybody's reluctant to do this. Your gut says that you should highlight everything, right? That's kind of what we're taught when we start highlighting. And in the reality with black, you want to make your highlights really minimal. So that's why it's hard for a lot of people to paint. It's really counterintuitive. I'm going to sneak this drownable highlight up the middle, but I'm going to narrow everything else. The other way you can do this, or work with this, is you can use black glazes to knock down your highlight. So there are a couple different ways you can tackle this. I'm actually going to thin my black even more to that tune because I want to be able to kind of layer it. Black is a really high coverage color in Master Series, so it can be hard to layer unless you really thin it. But we want to definitely layer it because we want to take down this purple a little bit. Essentially, you don't have to necessarily get 75% of the surface like pure black, but you've got to get close to black. So if I use some glazes to kind of darken my drownable pink in there, see? So it's a very careful little balancing act that you're doing, that you're trying to do. You want highlights, but at the same time, you have to stay conscious that you need most of the area to be black. So you really have to think about then what your brightest highlights are going to be. These are still really, I think, really thick side panels for this to be a black. So I'm going to knock them down yet again. Because this is kind of covered over by an armor plate, so there would be a shadow here, and also they're more vertical, whereas here all of this is sweeping out under the light. I'm going to mix a little bit of my drownable pink with my bleached linen to get a slightly lighter highlight and kind of bring that out here. Really thin though. Just like with other highlights, when you start going up from a lower highlight to a brighter highlight, you want to make the highlight smaller. Hello, Goblinzoid. Yeah, this is it's a chibi vampire, Monique. That's her number. So we are painting her. We're painting black cloth today, essentially, and probably some black hair if I get through all this black cloth. Which says she has a bunch of it on her back, but a lot of it's going to stay black back there because the hair is such a heavy shadow over it. But yeah, she's cute. She's actually the first chibi that I have painted on stream. I think, at least for this show. I did a little bit on the werewolf. This still isn't done, but I found him the other day, so I could actually finish him. The werewolf is actually my favorite chibi that we do. I forget what his actual Lon, probably, because of Lon Chaney. But he's a cute Bonesylvanian. Hello, Bean Mitch. Oh, happy sub-anniversary, happy sub-anniversary, happy sub-anniversary, happy sub-anniversary. And it's the 12-month sub-anniversary. Awesome. Black velvet, yeah. Black velvet is difficult. It's just like black wool. You can't go above a certain level, Zen. I did some black wool. If you're on my Patreon, I think there's a $10 video where I do black wool on a Viking bust. I patterned it after Kirill's actual paint job on that Viking bust for the box art, but he did it in green and I decided to do black. There we go. So now that's almost where I want it, where I've still got the suggestion of the drownable pink up here, but I brought it down with black glazes. I've brought up some higher highlights toward the bottom, and I've worn the bottom of this by adding in some more highlights, but I still have a majority of the surface area is still black. So that is just about right. I'm going to maybe bring up just a little bit more. Yeah, I could get away with that. Sometimes you do want to push it just a little bit more highlighting. But yeah, with velvet, I think it's key to make sure that you get your highlights in the right place to like convey. With black velvet, you got to really convey the velvet by your texture and your placements of things. So, happy subiversary, happy subiversary, happy subiversary, happy subiversary. Congrats, Shadow Raven. And planer with the resub. That is not a subiversary, though. It has to be 12 or 24 months planer. However, you are still awesome because 17 months. So you get to be awesome, but you don't get to trigger song. Trigger song is like 12 and 24. Has to be your subiversary or your double subiversary or your triple subiversary, although we haven't hit that yet because we haven't existed that long. I think it's Lon. Chibi. I'm pretty sure that the werewolf is Lon. I have him over on my shelf. Probably for Halloween I'll pluck him out and maybe finish him on stream. Because I really like how he was going. Alright, I'm going to pick up the highlight there a little bit on the side here and blend it in a little better. And then if I really want to, and this, now how high I bring this cloth up, you will take awesome. Good. Cool, Nigel. Yeah, she's cool. She's fun. And she's adorable. I mean, what more could you ask for, really, in a vampire? That she'd be adorable. So I'm taking the shadow of the side of the face there, and I'm using that as my highlight on the black cloth so I can repeat colors. Yeah, you're 1.5, Neural. Congrats. Congrats, and thanks for the resub. Thanks, Brad, for confirming that item number. Yeah, I love that little werewolf. That's my fave, Bone Sylvanian. This is probably my second, I would say. So, okay, so how high you take these highlights is going to determine how shiny is going to be determined by how shiny the cloth is. So if you decide that she's actually got some black satin going on here, or something like that, or a cloth that has a sheen to it, then you want to pop the highlights up like almost to white. But if you are just like doing like just more of a normal cloth, like a linen or something like that, then you just want to leave it right around there. You don't have to go all the way up to white when you're highlighting black. You only do that if it's shiny. Hair is always shiny, so that's why I've gone up to off-white, to an almost white, pure white up here. But you don't have to use the same level of highlighting, and shouldn't, on the same color across your model. You should be thinking about how shiny is the surface. And if you think that, well, you know, the cloth will look better if it matches the hair, then you want to go that way. But you also, then you have a lot more to think about as far as realistically highlighting and what essentially then becomes NMM cloth. Because make no mistake, silk and satin, shiny cloth, is NMM cloth. Like when you have to think about that. And it's actually more like hair than NMM because most of it is translucent, although satin isn't. Satin's very opaque. So satin is more like NMM, silk is more like hair highlighting, where you've got a shiny surface that's translucent. So that's why it's so messed up to try to think about those things, is because you're having to adapt those very specific lighting profiles to a surface that is an unusual shape. Yes, halfway to your next subiversary. All right, so that's, but for me, if I back out and I look at the model, I'm like, that level of black is good enough for me. Like, I could take it up just a tiny bit more, but then I'd be risking, like, implying that it was shiny when I didn't want to. So, like, if I was going to take it up any bit more, I would make those highlights really tiny. Like, just edge, really. Just to bring that up, see? So you can do a tiny edge highlight and get away with it often. And that what that does then is it brings out that cloth and makes it stand out better. But you haven't really, like, impacted, like, the overall characteristics of the cloth. So, and if you do feel like maybe it's starting to read as shiny and it's a little bit weird, then go back with your Drown and Pull Pink or whatever you're using and kind of, paint that over so that you get a softer color, softer line, or grab a little bit of your black and glaze it down so that you can keep it minimal. So it's all what effect you were going for. Just going to bring this up a tiny bit. There we go. That's a little bit better. I like that. Okay. Hello, dog father. So that's about a good level of cloth. And you can tell, and it reads correctly. You can tell that the hair is reading as more shiny and the cloth down here is just picking up the light a little bit. It's not over the top. So then we'll go back here. And we have to look at where light is falling and not falling. So I'm kind of going to orient my model. And look at that. The hair just drops a shadow over the whole thing back here. I can see a little bit of highlight falling over here on the side folds, though. So I can see that. So I will put some highlights over here. But on this back part where it's just skirting, where you can hardly even see it. You can't see it for a reason. So yeah, she's got a kind of a split skirt back here, but this part that's like under both her hair and her shield, I'm just going to hit the edge. I'm not going to highlight any more of it. Because it wouldn't be proper with the positioning of it. You really just need a little touch in those places. So I'm going to grab my Drown and Pull Pink. And I'm going to mostly hit the edge, and I'm going to leave the rest of it to be. Like, you need enough. This is where you kind of marry, like, stylized and realism. Because you need enough there to, like, for it to show up, right? You don't want to just leave it black. Even if it's in complete shadow, you'd get a little bit of bounced light from the environment. So it should get a little tiny bit of highlight, but it shouldn't get a lot. And mostly what's important is you defining the shape, right? So that people can see what's there. That it's cloth, and so that you can see the folds. So keeping that in mind, think about what's important, and, this information, this fold back here, this cloth back here isn't super important in the whole nature of the miniature, right? It's kind of there, but it's not like it's a super important part of the model. So put enough there that you can pick out the details, but don't, like, obsess about it when it's not important part of the model. He uses quite a few Rex. Like, if you didn't know, actually, did you miss yesterday when I told you guys, like, when Kirill came to do the seminar, he really liked Master Series, so Ed sent him everything. He uses a lot of Reaper paint. I mean, he also does a lot of stuff on offer from other companies, like they'll all send him paint to try out. But whenever he posts something up on Facebook, you'll notice he tags Reaper Master Series. So, yes, one of the top painters in the world loves my paint line. This makes me happy in my soul. So, hello, Luther. It is a good day. As I mentioned to Planer earlier, I have been waking up and thinking to myself, it is a good day. Today is a good day. That's my latest little practice I find it lifts my mood in the morning to stop and think, today is a good day. Sometimes you just have to tell yourself. You have to, like, order yourself to have a good day. It works, weirdly. As long as you don't give yourself any back talk. I mean, if you're very, very, if you tend to yell at yourself a lot, then, maybe you're going to have a little fight there. But so I'm picking out the little folds. Yeah, he likes the Reaper paint. So the one important thing here is there's some buttons back here, and this is actually a two-part cloth. And so that's important information. I mean, because it's part of the design of the figure. So I am going to put a highlight going up that fold. See it? To show that. And of course, when the buttons come in, it'll be more evident. But I make sure to emphasize that because that's, you know, that's a design thing. If the sculptor or the artist hadn't wanted you to see that, they wouldn't have, you know, designed it that way. So obviously they want you to see that element of her costume. So I am going to bow to them and put a highlight up there just because that to me elevates it into this is useful information. Therefore, I am going to highlight it. Even though it's not, you know, may not physically get as a highlight going all the way up the seam there is a little bit of light falling in this through this area past her shoulder and arm onto this. So I can swing it. It's close enough. Cool, Luther, exactly. Yeah, when you're learning and maybe you're struggling a bit with the wet palette, it can pay to go to the well and to use the well palette to learn paint consistency, to learn what the paint should look like and feel like, and what you can do with different consistencies. Then go back to the wet palette and you'll find that you can work with it a lot better because you'll have developed that sense of where you need your paint to be. So then the wet palette, you know, when you load your brush, you're going to immediately think, oh, well, this is a little bit thick, or, you know, so I just find the well palette is better for kind of internalizing where your paint should be. And I'm glad it's working for you. The shininess is going to depend on where the light hits, and you can actually see it here, Val. So you've got the halo on top of the head. You always do that. Then the hair comes out, and you can see that there's another area where the light hits. See it? I haven't painted or highlighted any of this, but you can see the light hitting this part. And then when it tucks back down here, it kind of goes in. See the shape? So it peaks around here, and you're going to get a highlight. And then it cuts in, you're going to get a shadow. And then as this lower part like bulges out, that's going to pick up the light again, both here where it cuts across and down here. And then you're probably going to pick up with just a little bit like down here. You can see where if you use a light and then you could look at it, you can usually see roughly where your light should be. On the sides of the head is where it gets a little dicey. But you can kind of see here, just kind of look at where the shapes are facing. Like you've got your highlight here, so you're going to get it kind of a shadow where it kind of dips in here. But then where it bounces out here, you see where it kind of mounds out, it's going to catch the light again out here. So then you're going to have your secondary highlight, where your secondary highlight is here, but then it's going to be down lower on the side because it's where does the hair stick out. And you can see my ring light picking this up actually, and you can see the shadow also, right here. And then you can see the ring light picking up these strands down here. So you're going to look at it from several different directions, and you're going to kind of look at where your light hits. Likewise, over here, there are several thicker locks of hair that are going to be highlighted right here in this band. And then you can see a shadow, then you can see another highlight. So you're going to constantly be, hey there, trouble. It's actually doesn't have Kyril's name in it. It's the AK FAQ miniature painting, I think. Miniature painting FAQ. And it's by AK Twisted Oma. It's one of their big books that they put out. It is pricey, but it's Kyril. So I'm saving up money for it now. Yeah. Yeah, but you want to make sure you don't just go like halfway on all the sides, Val. You got to look at where your dips and hollows are. Like you wouldn't go halfway here on the back of the head because you can see the hair cuts in. And because it cuts in, it's going away from the light. This all would be a shadow area. Whereas the highlight would be correct out here. And that's at the same level as this dip. But on this side of the head, this is where the hair comes out. It sticks out. And then it's got a shadow underneath it. So you really have to look at all four sides of the head. After you've got your crown highlight down, you got to look at all four sides of the head and judge them separately based on what you see. Yeah. Oh, Kyril book, totally worth it. I mean, like I said, David's got the AK like scenery building, diorama building book, and it's really cool. Very inspirational. All right, I'm actually, I think I am going to keep my black. I want my black a little bit more solid. I'm going to grab just a little bit. I thinned it way down for glazing, but now I want it more blendable. So I'm going to pop one more thing back in there. One second. Ms. Monique's going to sit here and be blurry for a second while I mix up this paint. $500, yeah. Yeah, Kirill's a pretty cool teacher. I mean, like I said, his workshop actually was probably the most influential on me, like of the workshops that I've taken and classes. Possibly because his painting style is closer to mine than, say, like Sergio's. Sergio's is like the antithesis of mine. Sergio's style and my style are like at two opposite ends of the poles. Unless I make an effort to paint the way he does, which I could do now, and sometimes I really enjoy it. It really depends on the model, though. It really, really does. I think that some models are just better for that comic booky, really pop style than others. And I have definitely like experienced where I started with more of the over-the-top highlights and then totally dialed it back on a model because the model's just more naturalistic, in my view. It wasn't reacting. It wasn't looking the way I wanted it. So you can use more than one. As you develop your own style, I mean, definitely try different styles, play with them, figure out what works for you. But remember, you aren't wedded to your style. Just because you like do some comic book type painting, and that's usually what you do, don't let people always expect that from you. Like, switch it up. Because that's how you continue to grow as a painter, is by, looking at different styles, playing with them, different techniques, and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Yeah, I have to save up for the Kirill book. I'm trying to be a good Anne since I'm a starving artist. I'm not so starving artist because, I cook a lot of good food, but point stands. I have to budget for it. It's a really nice book. My birthday's coming up though, so as long as it's still in stock by my birthday, I should get it for a birthday present for myself. Or I guess if my wonderful boyfriend is looking for present ideas for me, that would be an easy one. That's what I should do. I should drop hints. Which usually with David, that dropping hints is actually, hey David, if you're looking for a birthday present idea, I want this. Twisted Dome, a good idea. Yeah, it's a good present thing, right? Because it is such a beautiful book and it's so expensive. It's like a really good coffee table book, right? Except it's practical. So yeah, that kind of thing is really cool. I like owning these because I like kind of seeing how different painters have, because there's several painters that have their own book out now, right? On how they paint. And it's cool, and I like seeing how they all tackle it, because some of them are more about like their own life and, their own philosophy, and some of them are more about nuts and bolts, and some of them are more like, taking you, kind of showing you how they work through projects. And they're all very different, right? So it's always interesting to me, as somebody who someday wants to do her own book, it's very interesting to me to see how different painters tackle it. And also to see the response, right? The response from various audience on whether they liked the book or not and why. So that's all very interesting. So now I've gotten my purple a little bit out of control here. Yeah, hint, exactly. That's what you have to do with David. David is a very straightforward brain, and he misses subtlety. This is one of actually the things I love about him, is that I just have to be straightforward, and then, ta-da! It's AK's, I think, miniature painting FAQ, Luthar? I think. If you look up AK FAQ Kirill, Kirill, you probably will find it. And do look up Kirill's stuff on his Facebook And I think I'm pretty sure he's on Putty and Paint. I think he's as himself. He used to use the sobriquet, the yellow one, but I think he's just Kirill these days. Kirill Kanev. But he is a Russian painter, and he is top-notch. And we had him in to do a seminar at Reaper a few years ago. And it was very, very cool. There we go. AK Figure Painting Techniques Fact. Thank you, Harumph. Morning, Max. How's it going? So, my highlights always stand out a little bit more on camera than they do in person, but you can see how this is reading maybe as a darker, bruisier purple right now, and it's not so much reading as black, right? If you take that and you compare to the front here, you can see the front is reading as black with some interesting purple highlights. Yeah, Trouble. Sometimes, but those guys, it's cool, right? It's just like, you don't have to be all like sneaky and subtle. You can just tell them. And they're okay with that. They actually like guidance. And to be fair, David does like, he does know that I like certain things, and he does like surprise me with them, like orchids, flowers. He surprises me with flowers a lot. I never expect flowers. Because I've never had a relationship prior to David where the guy enjoyed getting me flowers, but I like flowers, so I am thrilled. Like, I'm always surprised. I never see it coming. And I love it. I love it when he gets me a bouquet. Although the orchids, he's created a monster with the orchids. So now I think he's regretting it. Yeah, Shadow Raven. I think a lot of guys are like that. I mean, some guys like to kind of like figure it out, like it's a puzzle for them. But most guys, they're distracted with their own lives, their own work and everything. And I think about me, like, if I want to get David a present, I need to like really pay attention. Like if I show him a model and he's like, oh, that's really cool, and he doesn't immediately order it, then I put it on my mental list of, hey, this is a good David present. But I have to be really good about spotting the moment when he's like really engaged with something and really like, I can see that he really likes it, but maybe for whatever reason he decides just not to pull the trigger on it right away. So yeah, I think that there's something to be said if your guy really likes to surprise you. Maybe they're good at that, and if you like to surprise your guy too, but I think it's hard. Like, it's really hard to come up with stuff for David if he doesn't, like, tell me he'd like something. And usually he doesn't. All right, so I'm highlighting more. So, okay, I just said there was too much purple on there, but now I'm highlighting it. What am I doing? Well, it's because I'm about to glaze it. Yeah, crows. Right. Yeah, I think there's room for both. Like, with me, I really love it when he surprises me with flowers, but when it comes down to like, hey, what would you like for your birthday? I do appreciate the ask. Because then I can tell him, like, if there's something like Kirill's book that I've really been wanting, but it's expensive, and so I just really can't feel like I want to buy it. Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah, I'm with you, Shadow Raven. All right, so we've got a bit much purple, so we're going to grab some black and we're going to make a glaze. Bloop. We're using our, for brushes today, we're using the Da Vinci Maestro Series 10, size 1. I've been going back to the Da Vinci a lot lately. Although I find that it's fairly interchangeable with the Raphael, but like for smaller stuff, I do tend to reach for something that's not quite so huge. All right, so right now that's marginal. We're almost there. This is more black than that, so I am going to hit this with a glaze. You want to get it quite thin. Like, this is not really good glaze yet. And the reason is you can see how dark it is on the side of the palette, right? This is the other reason the well palette is handy for this sort of thing. Yeah, Luthar, we've all been talking about that. Like, even back before I started working for Reaper, over 20 years ago, when I was in the Imps mini painting group in Chicago, we were all discussing that if we did an Imps book together, we would do a spiral. But it's really hard to find somebody who will do that kind of backing. And it tends to be more expensive. And so you gotta find just the right, like, who's gonna make your book, right? And that's the problem. Especially if you're paying yourself to get it done. If you're self-pubbing, which a lot of these books are. Yes, exactly. So that's the problem, is really sourcing that. And a lot of painters probably look at it and they're like, we understand that this is more, usable. But like, look at Kirill's book, 500 pages. You're not going to spiral bound that. It would be terrible. Like, pages would be ripping out. I mean, because spiral binding does have its downsides also. So that is the big problem. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I think for big books, it's just really difficult. Okay, so this is a glaze, guys. See how little that colors the outside? Remember what it was a second ago? So this is a good glaze. Also notice the color is not falling out of solution. It's not separating. This is why Master Series is awesome. Is why you will sometimes see a little bit of separation. Like I'm seeing a tiny bit of bluing here in the middle of the Draw Nipple Pink that I've thinned. You'll sometimes see a little bit, but in general, Master Series is going to stay in solution better than a lot of brands are. Yeah, I don't know. It would be a hard call for me. Because when you're coming down to it, Luthar, a lot of these people are just like, I need to get the book out. And they're going to look at Spiral and see how hard it is and see, like, at a 500-page book, I wouldn't buy it, like, as a consumer. Just because I know how spirals tend to crimp the first and last pages, and then they wear out, and then they rip out. And if I'm paying over $100 for a book, no way am I going to go for that. So there's practicality issues as well. If you're doing a smaller book, then I could see how spiral could be doable. But usually spiral is good in very quite thin books. And when it gets heavy, then you really don't want a spiral binding for durability. So there's also this this consumer idea that spiral binding is cheap, and that's because of notebooks. So even things like cookbooks, think about it, because cookbooks also need that, right? You really wish you had a spiral binding or something they would lay open easily with, but they don't do it. Well, why don't they do it? There's a reason. So it's both the utility of it, the fact that it's going to wear a lot worse, I think, and the idea that a spiral binding isn't high quality if you're trying to sell an expensive cookbook or how-to book. I think you get a couple of different things there. Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing too, Twisted Oma, right? Though, is you have the option to do that for like what, $25-$30? So as much as the book costs sometimes. So, like, if you've got Kirill's book, does that mean it's a $250 book if you spiral bind it? And it has durability issues. So, yeah. I mean, I think that the way to do it, if you were going to do it, and certainly there's a way to do it. Always there is a way. So, if you were going to do this, or if I was going to do this, what we would do is we would do what Scale 75 just did with their Minipedia. You would do a set of smaller books that together equate to one big book, but because you're doing smaller ones, you can spiral bind them. I don't think Scale 75 did spiral bind with Minipedia, but that's the kind of format, I think, that you'd want if you're doing that sort of thing. And I think that would work. You could do it. But I think that you have to, like, look at, yeah, spiral binding done right is expensive. Exactly, Val. Like, I have our puppy evaluation rule book that teaches our puppy evaluation for our dog club. That is a spiral bound book because you want to have it at hand, you want to have it laying open so you can look at things when you're learning and stuff like that. But it's a much smaller book. It's maybe 75 pages, maybe 80. And it's actually held up over the years. So, yeah, do it in volumes. Exactly, Twisted Them. That's what I was just saying. That would be... Now, the downside of that is... then you're paying more as you, the person who's creating the book, you're forced to make the customer pay more because you are doing individual books, which are going to cost more than doing all of that content as one book. So then you have to think about that. Am I outpricing my audience? Yes, and shelf presence at retail. Yup. And you can't put it face out because spiral bindings like tend to sag and like, it's like it doesn't hold the book together quite as well. So yeah, then you run into that. Like there's so many reasons spiral bindings haven't caught on, even though they seem to be the obvious choice. All of these things, upsides and downsides. And I think that the downsides are just bigger in general, just bigger. But yeah, you can always take it and spiral bind it yourself. It's just going to cost you quite a bit to get it done nicely. Yeah, I've seen the wire rows. Yeah. I figured it would be chibi. And again, the durability gives me question marks. So we did a glaze, and now this is much more black. Essentially, the glaze knocked down all my midtones to be darks, and it knocked down my highlight to be a midtone. And so that now reads as a lot of a much more dark than it did before. And if I wanted to, I could take another black glaze. This is the great thing about really thin glazes, is you can just continue to build them up. I could take another black glaze and pop it out here. Now I put a little bit too much pooling on there, so I'm going to have to wick off that excess fluid. Sometimes you can get away with just painting one thin layer over the surface if you have very little paint on your brush. And we'll let that dry. Maybe do a little spot glaze. You can layer a bit with glazes if there are darks. There we go. So now that comes out, but it's still noticeably dark. If I really feel like I'm still like getting too much light here, I can tackle it with just little tiny glazes to kind of minimize some of these highlights. But I do want a little bit of that to show up. So I think that if I compare these two, these are big rounded folds too, whereas this one is more of an edge thing. So you highlight them a little bit differently. And there's still enough highlight on this fold here. I feel like I need to bring that one down a bit. So I'm going to grab a bit of my glaze, and I'm just going to paint it over that single fold. Very little. Yeah, that's print shop is usually where people go to get the spirals, done if they want a spiral binded book. That's where I went. But yeah, I can imagine the big books are a super mega pain. So yeah, it's sad that there are so many barriers to doing spiral binding. But there's definitely a reason why these books are not done spiral. Okay, just getting a little bit more there, and we've got that there so we can see all of our highlights. Got a little bit stronger highlight here still. But then again, yeah, I should shade this a little bit more. Being persnickety here. Oh, I'm going to get up and stretch. Yeah. Unwieldy floppy books. Yep, I'm with you, Chibi. Yep. So yeah, if you did it in like digest form, then you could, there we go. Just gonna get up and do some stretches, and meanwhile we'll put Monique with her card. Well, actually, it kind of like bleaches her out, so we'll leave her there. There. She can stare at you while I do my stretches. So yeah. I don't know, it just, you go back and forth on it, and I think for a big, beautiful book like Kirill's, you want a nice presentation with a strong spine, and, or as strong as you can get anyway. I don't know how durable those AK books are, because we've only taken David's out a few times. So, but I guess we'll see. So yeah, it's as somebody who might want to do my own book, someday. I don't know, it's a hard call. If you've been sitting around, please get up and stretch. Yeah, Spiral's better for smaller books. Yeah, Wyro. Yep. Past 200, just go hardback. I'm with you, Chibi. Hello, Dragon Eye. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And it also, as somebody brought up, distribution is also a thing, right? Like, if you expect it to be appearing in game stores or something, you need to give it a spine. Like, you need to make it easy to merchandise. So there's all these things. All these things. Yeah, that was also a much smaller book, right, Whitest? Like, I was thinking of that one in particular when I was talking about it, and it was a much thinner book, as I recall. Not a 500-page monstrosity. Yay. All right. Got our stretches done. Yeah, only like 100 pages. So that, I think for small painting books like that, spiral binding is feasible. Hydrate. Yeah. Yeah, with such a big price tag, yeah, the soft cover is disappointing. Agreed, but... Yep. Oh, we were just talking about painting books and how we always wish they'd be spiral bound, but the horrible downsides of spiral binding just make it really a bad idea. A very expensive and really not very workable for the marketing of painting books idea. Unless you're doing smaller digests where you can put out a series. But then as a painter, if you're doing your own book, like, that doesn't feel like as fancy as having your own book, right? Like having this big hardcover that's all like beautiful and glossy, like that's what we all dream about. And it's not the same. Now, if Reaper ever decided that it wanted to put out a series of painting books with like me and Rhonda working on them, that would be a great candidate for spiral bound smaller volumes. Like, hey Reaper, are you listening? That would be a good one. Because then you could do that sort of thing, you know, like have one small book on skin tones, you know, and have it be spiral bound, have one small book on cloth and have it be spiral bound with several different lessons inside from different painters. Right. I kind of agree there, Dragon Eye, on the spiral bound, but hey, Bryce. Hey, Necro. Yeah, I don't know. I like my hardcover cookbooks. I mean, I'm so hard on cookbooks. Like, I swear, when I'm in the kitchen, I turn into a tornado of sauces and ingredients, and like, my cookbooks are casualties. Like, David is like, why is there stuff all over the pages of your cookbooks? I'm like, because I actually cook with them. Yeah, that's what the old dungeon, like the old monster manuals, second edition used to do, I think, Max Styles. And even there, yeah, we did produce Doug's book. Doug had that book like all done though before, like he was looking for somebody to produce it, so. But yeah, I remember those, and even there, like, I'd lose the front and back pages. Like, they always had, like, kind of extra pages at both ends of those Monster Manual 3-ring binder inserts, because they knew, they knew that you were going to lose it. Yeah, that's what, I mean, it's nice when these people who have been in the hobby for so long and who have so much experience, like, do a, like, comprehensive book. I own Shepherd Panes. I don't own Doug's yet. Because mostly it's like just pricing. Like I need to save up to afford some of these big books. And I'll probably get Kirill's first because Kirill's my favorite painter. You always pick up your favorite painter first. Just going to put a bit of a black line in here to make sure I'm separating the leather of the belt from the cloth. So we've got, that looks pretty good now. Like, there's enough highlight there that you can see the cloth, and it's not too bright, and it matches the front, and it's not, we don't bring it up so it's not shiny cloth. It is still, like, saying to my eyes, it's just a bit purple. And part of that is that the folds are more rounded, as I was just mentioning. But yeah, I'm going to tell David pretty much if he wants to give me a birthday present. There. All right. I think that cloth's pretty good. Let's go work on hair. Since we have our black out, it makes sense to mix up some blue liner and white and work on this stuff. Although actually I've had some rub offs, so I need to fix that real quick. Yeah, oh yeah. AK did it, Bryce. So, like, go... We've been talking about it all stream. It's like a 500-page monster done by AK. Figure painting, FAQ. And I'm totally going to ask for it for my birthday from David. Because Kirill. Watch it and stream, spend $100. Is that what happens? I thought it was like watch any Reaper stream and go spend money. Like, I'm pretty sure you guys run off and like spend tons of money on paint at Reaper too, and little chibi vampires, for example. If you haven't bought this chibi vampire yet, you totally should. Alright, I just want to have a nice solid coat of black on the rest of the hair before I dive in. So I'm just going to do that. Never hurts to have a couple of coats. Helps to prevent rub off in the future. The more of a solid coat you have, the thicker the paint is on the model, the more it's going to stick for the bones. Thank you, Quindy, for the vampire link. You can buy this cute little chibi vampire, your very own chibi vampire, because you know you want one. And you also want like things like the Asmodeus red that we painted her armor with, which is a pretty red. Yeah, that's true. For people who are compulsive Reaper orderers, you already own this product would be a good tag. Although then it would get annoying because you'd be like, you know, but I need another bottle of pure white. I know I just read it. All right, so now you can kind of see how shiny. When things are wet, see, you get that pure white highlight, guys. See it? There it is. Hair is wet. You can see it's drying back here, so you're not seeing all the shiny. But you can see where the light falls, right? So you can do that. When you put your base coat on, right away, hold it up to your light and see where your light falls. It is a smart thing. And if you ever wonder where to put highlights, just hold your model up under an overhead lamp or at an angle if you have the sun, like I do, this giant ring light. Just hold it up at the right angle for the light to be in the right direction and kind of look at what's lighter. That's how I learned. That's what I'm doing, planer. I mean, the highlights here are blue. Because I'm using blue liner plus white. I think that's the traditional hair color for vampires, unless you're going goth red. or silver. All those are acceptable. Yeah, it works fine for other surfaces. I mean, it's specifically for hair or NMM Max, because what that's going to show you is where your brightest highlights are. Because as you can see, since it was wet, it was all like little tiny specks of white, right? And when you're dealing with dull surfaces like cloth, it's not going to be as useful to you. You're going to instead just hold it up under a light and look at where the light hits. I mean, I have this like a little overhead light up here. So let me see. Can I get over? Not really. My light is over. So in the old days, I would always do this. I would hold it up really close to this LED bar and just look at where the light hit as I turned it around and make a mental note of where it was like really strong and where it wasn't. So if I use this now, I can kind of see where I should be. 1 second while I reposition my light to be in the proper position. But I mean, that's what overhead lights, that's what I was doing when I was trying to figure out where to highlight stuff. That's what I do. So it makes sense. But the wet trick is very useful for very shiny surfaces. Yeah, I may have actually used a bluer blue. I think I did, guys. I may have done Nightmare. Because this is definitely like the blue that I mixed up. The blue gray that I just mixed up is not blue enough. I didn't think I used Nightmare on this model, but I guess I did. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's vampire. Pretty light blue. Do you want it to be like warm or cool? Clear phthalo is going to be warmer. I would not use... blue liner is only going to give you a blue-gray. It's going to give you this color, Val, up in the right-hand corner of my screen. It's not going to give you a bright blue. So we're going to build that again with Nightmare Black. I just did a PDF about this, you guys. How to tell what's in colors by adding white. If you're on my Patreon, you can find that. That was just like last month. Hey, Trashorama, thanks for the resub. Yeah, I could tell that I used Nightmare, like, right just when I looked at, like, what the blue liner gave me. I was like, oh, too blue. Let's mix this up. Oh my god, Twisted Oma. That's nice. That's like your cat has been stalking you and is annoyed that you've been ignoring her while you watch things and work. And so then she's like, watch this, guys. Hold my beer. I'm gonna make her jump out of her skin. That would freak me out. Like, I would be lucky if the coffee didn't end up on the ceiling at that point. So you can see the difference. Nightmare, blue liner. And I talked about the difference, why this is a thing. But it's the different pigment bases they are built in. Both of these are great highlighting colors for black. But with her, probably because I went brighter with her red, I chose to go with the brighter blue. So, all right. So we know that this area is in shadow and is going to stay black. We also know that 75% of our surface needs to stay black. So when we bring in highlights, and this is actually probably too thick, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. I'm not going to worry about strands. I've talked about this before. When you are trying to map in a highlight on a textured surface, don't immediately worry about that texture. Just try to get your highlights right. That's the more important thing to do. This is a little bit too much. That's a little bit too much. Just try to get your placement right. And then mess around with actually suggesting strands. Hey, Bob and Julie, how you doing? So let's move this back up so we can see this. I want to put a little water in this blue so I can work it up a bit more. I don't want it to be so overwhelming. So we're back to, again, the painting hair initially like cloth. then worry about being more precise with the strands. Hello, Ninja. Yeah, we are knowledge heavy on this one. I tend to be a knowledge heavy paint instructor on stream. So I like to explain everything I'm doing and why. And explain the whys a lot. And with hair, it just pays to just paint it like cloth. Like, I'll still use a brush stroke that's in the direction of the strands. And I'll go a lot wider than I really intend to. Like, this is much more room than I actually want this highlight to take up. But I'll do that first and then I'll back off of it. I just want to make sure that my highlight placement is correct before I worry about doctoring it. Here we're going to get a lot. These strands, because they're sideways to the light source, where they stick out, we're going to get the light on those. You know what? I have a little bit of a mold thing that I didn't remove, and now I can see that it's going to annoy me, so I'm going to take a knife to it. Hold on, guys. Where is my knife? Did I eat it? I hope I didn't eat it. That would be very bad of me. I must have used it for something and then put it away in a different place. Oh no. Well, now I'm annoyed. It's not in any of my usual places. Huh. Apparently I'm doomed. Who knew? I'll have to figure out where I put it at some point in the future. I must have grabbed it to, like, do something with it. I guess I'll have to use a file. Although a file is just not as good as a knife in this circumstance. I'll have to go running around and... Oh, wait. Maybe I can get a backup. Do we have a backup knife? Please let me have a backup knife. Uh-oh. Nope. Alright. My hobby knife went missing somewhere. I'll have to go and find it. I'll just use the file for now. There's just this little nubbin here that I don't like. It's kind of a circular little thingy. Sorry, I got distracted by freaking out that my all-important hobby knife had gone somewhere. It went off on an adventure, apparently. Yeah, I could interrogate David, but that would disrupt the stream, and we don't have that much more time, so I'll just have to use my knife. Or my file, sorry. It could have also been me, like, just prepping something in a different place and absentmindedly putting it down, although that's really rare. Usually if I'm going to knife things, I keep them close to my hobby desk. So, yeah, we're just going to rub that right out. Try not to take out too much of the texture, but that'll get rid of that little nubbin thing that I don't like. Or at least get it to the point where I can ignore it. Can see it, that little circular area right there. You know, I had to have... Either David snagged it absentmindedly when he was over here staring at my vampire, or I was using it to do something and just forgot where I put it. In which case it's around here, like in close proximity here, and I'm just not seeing it. There, now I can paint over it. So yeah, I should have fixed that earlier. Oh, another one? Come on. Using a diamond file here, it's not the best tool. I really do prefer to use a hobby knife to take off these little things. For bones. There we go. Alright. We should be good. I'm still annoyed. Like, I'm always really, like, annoyed and distracted when I'm like, where did my knife go? Alright, so let's get back to, like, trying to figure out where our highlights go on this model. You can see, though, as I'm tilting it toward the light, you can see that there is a highlight right here in the wet paint. So, and there's a little bit of a highlight going up here, and that's because when the light is coming from this direction, that strand sticks out, and so it catches the light. And so you can use that then as a guide and say, all right, well, there's a highlight there, and just paint one in. Now, you sometimes do have to doctor this. Again, miniature painting is always a marriage between stylistic, what looks good, and realism, what would actually be. And different painters take it in different directions, but a lot of us just kind of do a mixture, because you're working on something that's so small that it isn't always going to be the best result to take it realism. So, you know, sometimes we push it in a little bit of a different direction because it looks better. And just take an artistic license pretty much to make it what we think what would be a better effect, right? What would bring out a detail that we really want brought out, even though it wouldn't have a lot of highlights on it. Well, since a hobby knife is a must-have, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to buy a new one if I can't find my old one, but there's no reason that I can't find my old one. Like, this is ridiculous. It's a hobby knife. It's silver and shiny, and it will be sitting there staring at me when I'm done with my stream. All right, so then again, side of the head, you're going to get a slightly different place for your highlights. You're going to get a band of shadow here, and then you're going to get more highlights down here. So once again, I'm just going to kind of block that in. And we're putting a lot. You notice in my first pass, I do a lot of highlight on a black surface. A lot more than I'm really going to keep. But I want it to read correctly. So I put a big bold highlight on it, and then I dial it back. So side and down here, because those strands stick out. And once again, we're not paying attention to necessarily trying to hit the strands. We just want to suggest like the body of the hair. Like you're suggesting volume when you do this. Because the hair has volumes. It has like waves and locks and, strands that clump together and all that sort of thing. I will even take a little bit down a little farther on the front of the head often. If I want to accentuate some hair going over the eye, I will extend those highlights a little bit. But you always want to alternate. You see a highlight and then a shadow and then a highlight and then a shadow and then a highlight. You see that with shiny things. This Monique is a kind of a good model to practice hair on because she's got such nice, she's got a nice flow. It's straight, but she has areas that are definitely like dipping in and then flaring out. She's got a lot of nice strands and locks of hair that are well sculpted. So she's definitely got some nice hair to play with if you are starting on hair. And of course, as a chibi, you can make her a little more cartoony, and it's good. So now that I've got all these big highlights in here, and I know that I really just want her hair to look black, unless I need to make my highlights a little bit less. So now I have to dial it back. So I'm going to take my thinned black. And remember, it doesn't have to be pure black, but it has to be like a dark, a dark color. Like near black. So I should say 75% of the surface on a black object should be black or very near to black. So I can put this glaze over this hair, and parts that I'm covering are going to go like darker. They're still not going to be pure black because this is a glaze. So it's more like putting a wash over it to darken the areas. But it's close enough. And this is a way that you can kind of sneak some highlights in while still keeping your hair dark. Like you could still put like on the front of the hair here a little bit extra over the face and not lose the fact that it's supposed to be black by just, you know, making sure that you glaze, bring those highlights down a little bit. They're still lighter than the black around them. I do want to make this one a little bit bolder. There. So a little bit more highlights there right above her face, because having the hair be really dark and without detail there is a bad idea. You want clusters of detail around the face to draw attention to the expression. So now we've minimized that highlight a bit. So we're going to go on and do that same sort of thing using our thinned black on the other areas here. And again, I'm going to be using a brush stroke that is kind of in line with the way the strands of hair would grow. And this just helps to kind of create that fuzzed out like effect that you get in hair highlights, since the light is really picking up individual strands. So kind of fuzzing out the edges by using a brush stroke that's in line with the hair, with the growth of the hair, is a good idea. So I'm minimizing the top a bit more. Coming down the bottom here, this is where the hair kind of cuts in or tucks in. And I want to take this less blue. Here on the side, I want to go a little bit more sharp. Yeah, I like this small sharp highlight here, because that's like a little poof of hair that sticks out. And then the underside of the strand shouldn't get as light, so I'm going to knock out a lot of that highlight that I had across that entire strand and blend in the edges a little bit. You have to highlight each little braidlet, Marls. Braided hair can be kind of a pain in the butt. I did it, do I have it? Yeah. So I did it on this one. And you're still asking yourself, like, where are their highlights? So I do have a highlight on each of these little braids on the side, but I have more of a highlight on the front because the light on this figure is falling straight down. But you can see I do have a little spot highlight on every one of the braids, and I have shadows in between them. And that's kind of like, if you ever look at somebody with braided hair that's out in the sun or outside, you'll see that sort of effect, that each of the braids where it bulges, it'll tend to get the light. I mean, you can also just do a search online for braided hair, and some of those model photos that you come up with will probably be, like, I mean, human models will be in like diffused light in a studio. But if you can find a picture of somebody out in the sun with braids, you can kind of like see how the light falls on them. Braids are interesting because they compact the hair, so you don't get as much translucency, I find. So they are more solid when you pull the hair together like that into chunks. But yeah, it is important to bring out each braid. Which means that highlighting braids is more work and requires better brush control. Or at least responds well to good brush control. Can also be a good way to, as with everything I say, when I say that, you know, it is more difficult and requires better brush control, it's also a great way to more work on building your brush control. Trying those little things and having to paint small details is the way you will improve. All right, so here I've got kind of a weird hair part where I need to bring in some strands, just because there tends to be, that's a little bit of a globby hair part, so I don't want globbies. So I'm kind of going back and forth with that area. That's a little better. Yeah, that's better. That looks good. So look at it from different angles. Use those different angles to assess. So now we're getting where the top part here I'm getting much happier with. Now we're going to go down and tackle some of this. Again, I haven't gone in and really grabbed individual strands on the top. I saved that for a later highlight. Out front, I'm just trying to get, where's my placement? Don't want to worry about strands yet. Is my light right? Is what I'm worried about. So I'll block out some of this. Sometimes I'll block out entire strands almost. Especially if if I put a highlight on like the underside of something where there wouldn't necessarily be a lot of light like I did there. So I just came in with a bit of black and narrowed that down a bit. And the underside of this one as well. So that mostly you see the strand here. And I still have a little, there is still a little bit of blue-gray on the underside of this, but it's not nearly so bright as it was. So it's not like really hitting the light. There we go. So that's starting to look a lot better. And you notice as I bring in the black back into this, even though I'm not like painting big blocks of black, it's still acting to make my blue less, right? So when this is where it can get tricky, where you're like, well, is 75% of this area black? Not yet, but introducing all these little strands of black to break up the blue is definitely having that same effect. So it can be hard to judge when you're looking at this and asking yourself, is enough of this area black for this hair to look black? And because you're doing all these little black strands in here, it can be very hard to assess whether that's actually the case. So what I usually do is to continue on with more highlights at that point and see if the hair looks black to me. Like, or if I feel like it's really coming off as kind of a dark blue-gray. And then I tackle that as I need to. But yeah, so breaking up all of this blue-gray with a little bit of black and taking down some of the blue-gray to be a darker blue-gray by applying these glazes over the top definitely brings the black back into the hair color here. And I didn't have to do a big blob of it to get that effect. There, breaking up that a little bit. So that's looking good. Like these highlights, you can see. I am going to put in a big blob of black there. That's starting to look like a real hair. Like it's got a nice flow to it. You can see the movement of it. You can tell that the hair strands are like crossing over here. I just put a little bit of a shadow here. I may bring some strands back in from that. This is just the back and forth that I go through as I kind of adjust, assess, back and forth, until I look at it and say, yeah, that looks like hair. There we go. And now I can bring in my next set of highlights. So I'm going to take probably a couple brushfuls of this and a drop of pure white and build my next highlight, which is going to probably be near white. When you're building highlights on shiny surfaces, you're building it up fast. You're going toward white fast. You're not taking your time and doing, a highlight and then a slightly lighter highlight and then a slightly lighter highlight. You really are rushing toward white. And the only reason, given that hair is shiny, the only reason you really get a blend at all is because hair is also letting some light shine through it. And that tends to create that bell curve with the highlights. I'm going to do 2 drops. So I put in my classes for ReaperCon yesterday, guys, and the ones I'm going to be doing are, let me look. Choosing your colors for your models, which is a color theory class. So we'll do probably a bit of a hands-on like choosing your first color and then working from it. And I'm using a pretty simple model, using Darius actually Darius is my class model for both classes, hopefully. Because Bones USA, man. It's all the rage. So we're doing with this kind of powder blue for our next highlight, and then we're going to go straight up. So it's going to be a lot of color wheel talk in that class, guys. How to utilize your color wheel and how to utilize your value scale, your grayscale on your color wheel. And then the other one I'm doing is... Wait, I wrote them both down so I wouldn't forget. Painting cloth, patterns, and weathering. That's what I'm doing. We'll talk about highlighting it as well, but obviously it's painting cloth, but it's also patterns and weathering. That one is a little bit more of an intermediate class. I put it down as an intermediate class. And you do need to bring a good brush for that one. That's in the description. Because you're going to want a brush with a really good tip, or you're probably going to be frustrated. And I do recommend also in the notes, in the description, I also recommend bringing a well palette. So we'll see how many people actually read the description. But I wanted to bring it up on screen. And I'm staying with a smaller class size because with hands-on classes, I have a very hard time giving quality instruction at a larger class size, because anybody who's taken one of my in-person classes before will tell you I give a lot of individual feedback. I go around to every person. So I always go for smaller classes. But yeah, so those are the two classes I'm going to teach. One is on Thursday, one is on Friday. We'll find out. I asked for earlier time frames. We'll see if I actually get them. However, I'm warning you also that David and I are teaching. We asked to teach in the same time blocks. So you're going to have to choose between David's class and my class. Willing to make everyone cry. Once everybody Aspire, we're still in... It's going to be a little while. The reason is, like, this is the first round where past instructors get to kind of submit their classes. And then after that, for any additional, like, slots we still have open, it'll go open to the public, where teachers that haven't taught at ReaperCon before, or new people who are, like, thinking about starting to teach, can then sign up to teach. So all that has to happen. The class slots need to get filled, and then Reaper will post classes. At least that's how it's done in the past. I don't get to call the turn away thing at all, Francis. But you're gonna not get as much out of it unless you're at least intermediate. Like, a lot of people would say that class should be advanced, but I actually don't feel that that's the case. I feel that I'm okay with being the bridge there. So as long as you understand how layering works, I'm cool. But yeah, instructors never get to really turn away anybody. Like, the closest thing that has happened in the past is if a student who really is not, like, at the right level for a class signs up, the instructor will offer to go and get them a refund afterwards. Because they just don't get as much out of the class as they needed to. And this is the problem with signing up on something that's above your level. It's why I like to try to teach at least one, like, beginner. My color class, the choosing colors one, that's for everybody. Like, I don't even it's a beginner level class. Even though some of the principles we're going to be talking about are, more advanced, arguably more advanced. But if you've been watching and, watching my Patreon stuff and on here, then you probably are familiar with the concepts. But, you could take the advanced class if you can get in. Just keep in mind that you may not get as much out of it. And that's also remember other people, right? Maybe there's somebody that could really get a lot out of that class that isn't going to be able to get it because you took it. So always be thinking, kind of, that's my ideal world, is that people who really can get value from the class take the class. And I know that's not always the case. But... all right, getting a little bit higher highlights on there to see if it's reading correctly. Right, Sagebrush. That happens all the time, and that's why I'm saying this now. It's like, when you arrive at a class just to get a class, or because you think you just want to take this class because it's your favorite instructor, keep in mind that you probably won't get anything out of it, and that you just kept somebody else who could use the class from getting it. So if you are not, like, honestly, Francis, the dealio is, if you're curious about that topic, but you think you're not at the level to take the class, just wait and catch me outside of class and say, hey, I almost took your cloth class, but I don't feel I'm there. Can you give me some tips? Here's one of my recent models. So if I wanted to start with texture, what would I do? And chances are I can take 5 or 10 minutes at the con easily to show you a technique that will get you to the next stage in your painting without you having to sit through a 2-hour class that may not be useful to you. Pendrake, we can set it. We can set like a minimum, kind of like what we'd prefer. We can set a preferred class size. But sometimes, the way that the system works, we sometimes accidentally get an extra person. But I think the class sizes are anywhere from 8 to like 20 or something, 8 to 15. No idea. I always go for a smaller class size because I feel the quality of my instruction, given hands-on, is very much not as good. So just a little bit of extra highlighting and see how that starts to make it come up. It's not quite to white yet. And these are also still probably a little bit thick, because that's what I'm noticing right away. Yeah, I mean, I've had to lend somebody a brush too, but that person had such a bad time in the class, Sagebrush. And that's why I'm going to say this stuff up front, even at the risk of offending somebody. It's like, if you don't take advanced classes if you're a beginner. You're going to be frustrated and unhappy, and we don't want that. Like, that's the last thing we want at ReaperCon. We want you to like get content and get tips that make you happy with the hobby, right? You should come out of ReaperCon super jazzed to paint. Like, that's the ideal world, right? That's what we'd love to see. So do be mindful of what classes you take, and be mindful that the instructors are around. You don't necessarily need a 2-hour class with somebody if you just need to know, where do I go next with cloth? Oh, they're halving the class size because of current COVID restrictions. That makes sense, Bryce. That's very smart. Quindy, well palettes are very useful especially if you are a beginning painter, but also, if you're me. So what the well palette lets you do that the wet palette is very bad at is you can control your paint consistency and keep a puddle of thinned paint at exactly the right consistency and exactly the same color for 2 hours while you're working with the color. So if I am doing texture, just like saying cloth texture or hair, and I need like my blue to be slightly transparent and really thin so I can do thin stripes, and it needs to not be too thick, and if it's thinner then it won't really work well, then this is going to keep that consistency perfect. Once I've dialed it in, it's going to stay at that consistency for at least 45 minutes, and I drop a drop of water in it if it starts to thicken up a little bit too much, and it's going to be good for hours, really. Whereas with a wet palette, you have to mix every brushful. Now, if you have a really good sense for your wet palette, then that's not a deal breaker for you. You're going to be fine with that. But if you are frustrated and maybe starting out and you really don't understand paint consistency very well, then I find it can be beneficial to try one of these. I find in any case, if you're starting in the hobby, try both. You're going to probably like one better than the other. So try one of these, and that will let you, say, oh, well, this is 4 drops paint to 2 drops water, and this is how it acts, and this is how it works, and this is what I can do with this, and learn that and internalize it. Once you understand, like now that I understand exactly where my paint should be for various techniques, I can use a wet palette and get it to do what I want it to do most times. But I find that if I'm doing textures, if I'm doing smooth blended layering, if I'm doing a lot of glazing, then I want this. I want this because it's going to keep this black glaze, this black layering black at this exact consistency for an hour while I'm working with it, which a wet palette is not going to do. The wet palette is always going to be wicking water one way or the other. So you can't just mix up a glaze on a wet palette. All the water just sinks down into your sponge. It doesn't stay at the consistency. So Yes, come sit with the teachers and ask. All the teachers are willing to work with you. Absolutely. Bryce has it absolutely correct. We are always willing to sit down and give a 5 or 10 minute demo on, especially bring a model so that we can see what level you're at. Because if you tell us, oh yeah, I can do layering, but then we look at your model and you could improve your layering, that's useful information for us. In giving you the most useful feedback for you. Because every feedback we give should be tailored to the student. Everybody's like, you could have 20 people who all can do layering, and they will all be at different levels and could work on different things with their layering. So anyway, yeah, that's why I like the well palette, because it lets me paint. It lets me thin my paint to exactly the consistency I want, and it stays that way for at least an hour. If it's warmer or drier, then it'll start to get a little tacky, but you just get a feel for it. You get a feel like when I see kind of a tacky drying edge around the edge here. That's how I know, since it's not like kind of creeping up the edge here, it's actually drying into a circle. Then I know that this color could use a brush full of water, and then it's going to be just fine. But I use a lot of thin paint, and so for me, the wet palette is not useful, not nearly as useful, because if I'm working with thin paint, it won't let me just keep it where I need it. So, but then again, you've also got great painters like Sergio and, David, who do great work with a wet palette, but they've worked with it for long enough that they're expert in it. So... yeah, Crows has it pretty much. Well, that's why I say Crows, just use both. Get used to both. You can get away with just a well palette. Yes. I mean, I do. I never. Okay, I would say less than 1% of the time that I paint is spent using a wet palette. Less than 1%. Because I can do everything else. Everything with the well. And some things I can only do with the well. Or they will be extremely frustrating with the wet. But yeah, but if you are a beginner, I highly, highly recommend getting one of these where they've got the many small wells. This is a 28 well palette. And they were back in stock last I checked. But because when you're learning, part of your big hurdle at getting good is understanding paint consistency. And this palette lets you mix those 4-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-3 mixes of various colors and do it consistently over and over again so that you can get a feel for what you can accomplish with a certain paint consistency. And over time, you just you load up the brush, you look at the paint on the brush, and you know if you've dialed it in because you've got this experience. But otherwise, it can be difficult to get that, I think, that internalized sense of paint consistency. I think it's harder to get that with a wet palette where you're not always conscious of how much water you might have. Yeah, Art Ninja, I mean, I use this in very arid climates, and I use it in... The key is just making your puddles bigger if you're in a hot, dry climate. Like, I'm usually using at least eight drops, or if you're in, heavy air conditioning, which is gonna, be a low humidity environment as well, under hot lights, right? I can make my own mini desert. But yeah, it's really arid here in North Bay. Not as bad as I've also painted in the high desert in Santa Fe and in Arizona. But in general, the key then is just to use bigger puddles of paint in your well. If you're using just a few drops, and especially if you're using bigger wells and you don't have these tiny wells, like these tiny wells, I can fit my thumb in them. That's how little they are. So, these help because less surface area is open to the air. And that is key. You want to use physics to extend your paint life. So if you are using a well, think about using a lot more paint and water in the well. Otherwise, as far as base coats, wet blends, and thicker paint applications, yes, absolutely, a wet palette can be great for you if you're in an arid climate. Yes. Yeah, because otherwise the problem with the bigger wells is you have to put a lot of paint into the bigger wells with a lot of water in order to get that surface area. You want a deep puddle, with as little surface exposed as possible, which is why these little bullet wells are so great. And this is from Cheap Joe's. Actually, I think somebody just, yeah, there we go. Quindy just linked it in the chat. If you go to the cheapjoes.com, they've got this porcelain palette. And it also cleans up super easy because it's porcelain. So you just put it in the sink with some hot water, and sometimes I'll spritz it with some method or spray soap or put some dish soap in it, and let it soak for like 5 minutes, and then a green scrubby cleans it up perfectly. I use a dropper bottle, gassed off. I find, though, that the drop I get out of this and the drop I get from a big brush full of water is the same size. So sometimes I will use brushfuls in place of drops, but in general, if you watch my stream, you'll see me using this. I mean, empty dropper bottles are pretty easy to get. You can get a 3-pack from Reaper, and they're useful. You can also do custom mixes with them. Like, I do have a bottle that has extra flow improver added to it in addition to the water. And when I'm doing really fine texture details or things like that, I'll use that. And when I'm just adding water, I just add the water one. Yes, Quindy is a fantastic moderator. Yeah, I find you may become one. I mean, always give it another try, Francis. And I've said this before, but just because something doesn't work for you at one stage of your painting development doesn't mean it won't work for you at a different stage. Like when I first tried wet palettes years ago, I hated it because I loved my super thin paint and my super smooth blending. Like I did on the Genie's skin, you know, that blending, no way am I going to be able to get that on a wet palette. No way. Like, it would take so long, and I still don't think I could do it. Like, it took super thin paint. But then, years later, I retried the wet palette and learned what it was good for. Each of these palettes is good at different things. So, depending on your style and your goals at the time you're painting, one could be much better than the other. There are definitely times, if I'm doing a model with a ton of, like, spot wet blending, where I'm just, like, trying to knock in everything on the model and I'm trying to wet blend and do a lot of that kind of touch-up wet blending where I'm not doing a lot of thinned paint applications or fine detail, the wet palette is loads faster. So, you gotta, like, kind of figure out what your goal is, and each palette is different, is good at different things, and they're bad at different things. I mean, this is not good for thick paint applications. It's going to dry. If you need the paint at full strength or very close to it, this is going to dry out a lot faster. Yeah, as long as it's a ceramic or porcelain. I prefer the porcelain. I find the finish is smoother with the glaze, but, you know, either is probably just fine. It's ceramic is the important thing. As long as the finish, you want a really smooth finish. Smooth, shiny finish. Because that's what makes it so easy to clean up. Yeah, that's a really good point, Bryce. Bryce raises a very good point as far as what's an intermediate painter, what's an advanced painter. It's how comfortable are you with the techniques. An intermediate painter may understand layering and regularly do it, but may not be super comfortable with it and may still struggle to find the right paint consistency, for example. Whereas an advanced painter is going to be very familiar, very comfortable with layering. They're going to understand, you know, they're more looking for like different ways to think about it, different ways to use it, you know, stuff like that. An advanced painter is going to be looking for a different value out of a class than an intermediate painter is. An intermediate painter is still like learning like specific conceptual techniques, some nuts and bolts stuff. Whereas an advanced painter mostly knows their nuts and bolts, but they may have still trouble with like certain conceptual techniques or color techniques. I find. Depending, though, everybody's different, right? So that's why I say that smaller classes for me are an opportunity to give personal attention to the painter, because everybody needs something a little bit different. Yeah, I mean, aspire, I guess the question is, like, you know, like, how good are you at, you know, like, there's certain core techniques, like, can you do a smooth blend? And can you do texture? You know, how good are you at those? Are you really comfortable with it? Yeah, I think I like Bryce's idea to kind of, like, assess it based on your comfort level. Because there's like understanding layering, like I did years ago when I was painting for eBay. And then there's like being able to freaking kill layering, like I can do now, you know? Can you kill it? Can you just kick its butt? Can you make it sit up and do tricks? That's the question. The only time that I do use that Pendrake, it's almost never. But if I have to show somebody what a paint consistency looks like if I was going to show you a layering paint consistency, I would use this top well to do it. And I would do that because I can stretch it over the top and essentially show you the consistency of the paint very easily. So like this is too thick for layering consistency. If I add some water to it, this is getting better. You want it to be able to pull it really thin. Like where it's really thin, brushed really thin on the palette, it should be almost invisible for layering, but it should still show full strength back here. So that's the only time I use that top well, is if I have to stretch out a color to kind of see, double check if I'm in the right consistency. But honestly, these days, I don't ever have to do the smear test because I have an internalized understanding of what my paint should look and feel like. The minute I load my brush, I know if it's too strong or too weak. And that's what you get just after years of paying attention, right? Like, this is why I tell people, you don't need to paint a lot per week. If the time you do spend, you're actually paying attention to what you're doing. You're trying things, it's focused learning, right? That's how you get better. You could do 15 minutes a week next to somebody who paints for 3 hours a week, and you could still get better than them faster, notably faster, if you were focused learning and they were just painting. Yeah, I mean, I was using the flour ceramic because that's all that I had, Polaris, but I did have to put like 8, 10, or 12 drops of paint into that, plus water, to get it to the level where it would stay at the right consistency over time. So I was wasting a lot more paint. And these little wells are they're a lot less open and slanting. They go up faster as far as to the vertical. So they're deeper well, faster. So yeah, far fewer drops, and it'll stay at the right consistency. Oh yeah, sorry, we went rather off on a tangent, didn't we? Oops. Oopsie, I need to run. So we talked about ReaperCon and classes and intermediate versus beginner versus advanced. And I'm totally stealing that Bryce, by the way. The whole how comfortable are you with the technique thing. But we also we set up our black hair and we did our black cloth on Monique. So we did a lot of painting black today. So if you are interested in painting black, is shiny versus dull surfaces and different colors you can use, definitely watch this VOD. Otherwise, tomorrow is our Wyvern Day. It's Wing Day again, guys. It's Wing Day again. We're gonna make those stripes look better. Wonder what they meant that for. Oh, the wider palette, you mean? The flower palette, Pendrake? That's actually for inks. Like for brush technique and inks. That palette, I think, originated for calligraphy. Because you've got those big, wide... You use a lot of ink when you're using a big calligraphy brush. Like Asian, specifically, like Japanese and Chinese calligraphy. That's what I originally saw those palettes used for. Yeah. I usually use hot water, and then I maybe drop like a couple spritzes of a kitchen cleanser into it if the paint has dried fully. Hi, Jet. We are about to leave on a raid. I've been on for like ages. Almost 2 hours. We went a bit off topic today. But yeah, who are we raiding today, Reaper? It's Wing Day, guys. So tomorrow is Wing Day. Oh, and I'm on my own channel later, twitch.tv/paintingbig at about 4 p.m. Central USA time. And we'll probably paint the Templar. Do some NMM. All right, Zambies. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you all for showing up, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye.